This week, we welcome Michael Goldgof, Vice President Data, Network, and App Security Product Marketing at Barracuda, to discuss the state of industrial security in 2022. In the Leadership and Communication section, how CISOs can prepare for new and unpredictable cyber threats, 8 leadership and management principles from ex-Navy SEAL, practice transparent leadership, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
It's time to rethink how we approach cybersecurity because the reality is modern cyber attackers are already past your initial defenses. ExtraHop helps your security team find and eradicate advanced threats before real damage is done. Protect your enterprise and customers with better defense. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops advanced threats at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP. Endpoint security is designed to protect every device in your fleet, wherever it may be. These days, that can be a lot of different places. Find out how HP Wolf Security uses emerging strategies like application isolation, along with a zero-trust approach and framework to give you a powerful, manageable, usable solution to your growing and increasingly spread-out security challenges. Learn how HP Wolf Security can make a difference across your endpoints at securityweekly.com/HPWolf.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 269, recorded July 18th, 2022. I am your host, Matt Alderman, from Living Security's headquarters in Austin, Texas. Now, why am I at Living Security's headquarters? So those that missed my LinkedIn post update this weekend will realize that Friday was my last day at Cyber Risk Alliance, but I am still doing my podcast. And today is day one as Vice President of Product at Living Security. So I am here onboarding, but still doing the podcast live from our headquarters in Austin. Joining remotely are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Matt. It's good to be back. I was off last week on a little PTO. It was my anniversary, so we spent a little time together as adults with no kids, so it was nice.
Nice. Did I surprise you with my announcement? And when you got back, you're like, wait a minute. Like last week he was, now he's...
No, congratulations. Happy onboarding day to you, my friend. And hey, you want to know what? I just realized tomorrow, my Patriot rookies report to training camp. It's about that time again.
It is. Time for football, boys. Also joining me from just up the road, a little northwest of downtown Austin, Texas, is my second co-host, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Matt. Hey, congratulations on the new gig. Good to be back with you. Last week I was out in Boise, Idaho, doing a little company event, little sales kickoff, and some whitewater rafting. So, yeah, good to be back.
Nice. It's good to have you both back, Jason. I put an article in there just for you, buddy, because I know you like that leadership article I put in there.
You know my style.
I do. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions often and will reach out to you once reviewed. Mike Goldgof is Vice President Barracuda, focused on the company's data protection, network, and application security products. Mike has broad technical and industry knowledge that spans information security, networking, and telecom. Michael, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to be on the show. And congrats on your new job, too. Thank
you. Yeah, time to get back in the industry. I think, as a lot of listeners know, I've been doing the podcast almost 4 years when I went to Security Weekly. And, you know, I miss building stuff. I'm an engineer by trade. And so it was time for me to get back in the industry and build product. We're doing some interesting things over here, which people will learn about soon enough. But good to have you on, Michael. This is a very interesting topic for me. In the state of industrial security. And my background quickly, you know, I started, my first job was in nuclear power. I spent 7.5 years in the nuclear power industry, spent about 6 months in oil and gas. So I'm very familiar with some of these systems. We spent a lot of time when I was at Tenable focused on aspects of operational technology and ICS systems. A lot has evolved from a security perspective, but Michael, my guess is from actually applying those security principles, maybe we haven't made as much progress.
Yeah, that's definitely true, Matt, and it's unfortunate because the threat environment just keeps getting worse and worse. And of course, in today's geopolitical environment, everybody's concerned with these attacks on industrial infrastructure.
Yeah, so let's start. You guys went out and did a research study around this. There's some kind of high level kind of key facts that came out of the research. Why don't you start there? Like, give us a quick overview of the hypothesis and why you did the research, and then some of those top line kind of highlights from the results.
Right. So what we wanted to do is to do some more research around industrial infrastructure, specifically industrial IoT, operational technology security. So we went out to roughly 800 decision makers in this industry and asked them a bunch of questions. And what we found out, first of all, is that 94% of industrial organizations actually experienced an security incident over the last 12 months. So that's very concerning because, we're talking about specifically industrial organizations. So these are critical infrastructure, manufacturing, water supply, all kinds of things like that. And, not only did they experience an incident, they had significant impact. On average, they were down for 2 days. So this is definitely very concerning. So that's the first thing that we found out. And the second thing is kind of more of a good news story, and that is that just about everybody is in the process of improving their industrial security. They've got either a security project underway or they're in the process of planning one. So they definitely realize that they need to do something about this and are doing that. And of course, there are solutions available. So we gotta keep our hopes up that things will get better.
What I think is interesting about the first result set, right? 94% of organizations have experienced an incident in the last 12 months. Now, we've covered some of them in the news on the different podcasts, even on this show, right? We know about Colonial Pipeline. We know about some of those incidents, the one down in Florida, the water treatment plant right around the Super Bowl time. 94% of 800 is like 700 or plus, doing quick math, right? I mean, it's 750, 760 organizations. Not all of those hit the news. So that means there's a lot of incidents happening that are not being publicized with an average downtime of 2 days. Now, think about that for a second. Like, how many millions of dollars does that equate to from a potential loss perspective just in the ones that you surveyed?
Absolutely. These are very significant numbers. And, when you think about being down for a day or two, and, typically people think of IT organizations and you can kind of work around it. But, if your manufacturing floor is down, then you can't be making things like, a while back we had the incident with the iPhone manufacturing, right? That like everybody knew that affected everyone. So the costs could be very, very high. And again, these are some of the critical infrastructure industries, energy, oil and gas, which are very hot topic right now. And we really don't want those people to be down. We need the energy and other things that they're producing.
Yeah, especially down here in Texas, it's really hot. I need that air conditioning, otherwise I'm going to melt.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent some time in the utility space, in the ICS space, both, working for a government organization and supporting these organizations as an IT services provider. We're going from systems that back in the day were isolated systems, not as complex. You couple that with, the statistics that you just put out, along with the pressures that are coming down on these businesses now, They have pressures for supplier connectivity, partner connectivity, persistent access, on-demand connectivity, the ability to scale on the fly with who has access to these systems. They have sensitive uptime requirements. Not to mention, hey, let's bring in support for a multitude of different protocols that aren't your traditional IT or security wheelhouse, right? I mean, you're talking about DNP3, you're talking about the IEC protocols, Modbus, so all of this complexity coming down on these organizations, it's that much more important to be able to have strategies and controls in place.
Absolutely, Jason. I totally agree. And, these are some of the things we asked about and found out. Like, as you mentioned, IT and OT are coming together. And, we found out that only 42% of the organizations have any kind of segmentation between their IT network and their OT network, which means that your salespeople or your accounting folks can be actually having, they're in the same network as the actual facility. So, lots of things like that going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's scary, right? Because Jason, just like you, at the plant, when I was working on nuclear power, those systems didn't touch anything else. They were completely isolated. It was all fiber. It was all DECnet. It was, VAC systems galore feeding the control room. But those connections and those doors have been open. And when only 42% have segmentation in place, that means 58% of these organizations, pretty much anybody has full access to be on these networks. That's got to be a little scary if you're running a plant or a manufacturing facility.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, it's the issue is that it's very difficult to contain anything. So once something gets on the network, if you don't have segmentation in place, very difficult to contain. And, you mentioned nuclear. Well, at least in the nuclear industry, there are government regulations that actually require all this air gapping between, and thank God that there are those regulations requiring air gapping between the facility and the rest of the network, and there's security and all of that. In many of these other industries, there are no regulations like that, and yet it's still part of critical infrastructure. So, yeah, concerning.
Yeah, network segmentation was one of the big findings out of this report. Mm-hmm. The other one, which I want to talk about next, is remote access, because that's how the whole water treatment plant issue in Florida propagated. It was a remote access. I think it was just a plain username password that got compromised through an account takeover or something that allowed them to get in. So let's talk about the remote access side of this, because that was another big finding out of this report.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you mentioned, and it's very frequent. Right? In fact, Colonial Pipeline was a remote access issue as well. So, so what we found out is that it's kind of double whammy, because you've got organizations that allow unrestricted network access to even external players, and at the same time, they don't even require multi-factor authentication. So we found out that in the oil and gas industry, for example, 47% are in that situation. They allow full network access, even for contractors, and they don't have the multi-factor authentication required. So this is a very high-risk situation. It's just an example of what's going on out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in those instances, as you mature as an organization, you want to start looking at controlling on-demand access, right? So times of access, how long they have access for, really getting down to those details. A lot of the progressive organizations that I speak to are looking at that level, right? They don't want just persistent access all day, every day. They want to control the times of access and who has access, and really bring down role-based access controls as well.
Absolutely. And so, and I think we're in a place where the good news is the organizations do realize that, but it isn't necessarily straightforward, right? Because as you mentioned before, there are machines, there are different interfaces, there are connectivity issues. How do you might have PLCs, programmable logic controllers controlling machines. How do you do MFA in this environment? It's not simple.
Right.
Yeah, there's some new technologies out there that are trying to build these buffers between the IT networks and the OT networks, right? We've seen like IT to OT firewalls, for example, which would do both some level of segmentation, but also remote access control.
Right.
And I think the scariest part is when you think about zero trust principles, right? Because it's all been about zero trust architectures. I mean, this is foundational. Limit, least privilege, limit access, multi-factor authentication. I mean, there's no zero trust principles in what you just described. It's basically full access, no MFA. So how would you ever put a zero trust network or any kind of zero trust principles in place at these plants without somehow abstracting out the kind of the dividing lines between the IT and the OT networks?
Yeah, absolutely. It's complicated. In fact, we asked that specific question: do you have zero trust access? And only 1% have zero trust access of industrial organizations. So, part of it could be, education and knowing about it, but part of it is complexity in implementing. Most of the zero trust access vendors just really have built solutions for IT organizations, not OT type organizations. How do you connect this thing to a windmill or a manufacturing machine? It's a complex thing, but definitely there are technologies to do that today, and so that's good. Their organizations are realizing, and in fact, most of them do have security projects underway to improve the situation, which is great news.
Yeah, for sure. Third bullet point from the report: lack of automation. Now, what do you mean by lack of automation? Because that term automation gets used in a lot of different contexts. So what is it about the industrial environment that lacks automation?
Right. Well, yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, there's typically full automation in industrial environments, or a lot of automation, but it's on the on the sort of main business side, right? On the manufacturing side or whatever. We specifically asked about automation as it relates to security patches. How do you update your industrial machines and other things? What is your process like of actually doing a security update? And are these security updates automated? And what we found out is that they're mostly not automated. And of course, when they're not automated, you may not be doing them frequently enough. You may not be having a consistent process, and that's what we asked about as it relates to automation. And it almost seems, Matt, that some of the patches and updates were kind of like reactive as opposed to proactive. You wonder how many of these patches are being done after they get hit, so that they know they need to update as opposed to on a regular scheduled basis.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the basics around patching, right? Now, let's realize that patching some of these systems are not easy either, right? Because we're talking about potentially non-IT based systems. So are there patches that can be applied easily to SCADA or PLCs or types of these? But a lot of these also have management consoles that are traditional IT-based systems that are controlling some of these controllers. Even there, the lack of patching and automation around patching there seems to be, I think, an issue of why some of these automation areas are lacking, I would imagine.
Right, absolutely. And as it relates to that, we found out that it makes a big difference of who does the patch. If the organizations try to do it themselves, only 40% automation. If they actually have a specialized service provider or device manufacturer do it, 75% automation. So, there are ways to do that and automate even in that environment. And those organizations that are more forward-looking there are realizing that that's the best way to do that.
Sure. There's a couple other things in this report that I thought were interesting. We're going to talk about budgets in a second, but there's a question in here about the stage your organization is at when it comes to implementing industrial security. And when you look at the 16 critical infrastructure domains, we did a research project last year with InfraGard around critical infrastructure resiliency benchmark, right? And we kind of stack ranked all the industries. What I find interesting is healthcare is way, like 17% have completed some IIoT or OT systems, right? That's really low to me for an environment that's been regulated since HIPAA. Like that one, it wasn't that low in our research, Michael. So I'm, there's just some interesting data here when you look at it. Like, why is healthcare so low? Maybe it was because of lack of budgets in the early days, but you would have expected finance, healthcare, energy, oil and gas, some of these really further along in their investments, but it doesn't look like that's the case.
Yeah, no, you're right, and I wouldn't guess why specifically healthcare is behind, but I think some of the HIPAA things are against specific. In terms of going after patient data and things like that, they're not necessarily access to the equipment in a hospital and things like that. So I think that, again, just got to catch up there to make sure that security is in place.
Yeah. Well, there is some good news in here. Spending is going up. I think that's good news. So, and there's active projects going on in this space. What did the research say about where spending is going to go? And in kind of, do we have any idea of the horizon? How long is this going to take to get some of these areas addressed?
Yeah, so that is an interesting question. And so what we found out is that most of the organizations are either in a place where they've implemented a project or more likely are in the process of implementing one. And so it's taking them a while to implement a security project. And we've actually asked a bunch of questions about that. We found out that 93% of the organizations have had a failed project on their journey to industrial security. And these projects have failed for a number of reasons. We again asked why, and some of them were it takes too long to implement. The cost gets too high. There's too much complexity. Maybe there's no clear responsibility of who is implementing this project. So people kind of struggling to get that done. But the other thing we found out, Matt, which is good news, is that for those organizations that have completed a security project, they have a very, very clear. So 75% of those organizations that have implemented a security project had no downtime. And remember, everybody has the downtime in the security incident. So one of the things we found is the security projects do work. They work for organizations. It just, it takes them a while to implement it, and just got to struggle through some of these growing issues and make sure that they don't go at it alone, and they have the right partner in place to implement the right project.
So Mike, to that point, what are some of the trends that you saw that made those projects successful? You said you had a group of the people that you looked at that responded. What was some of that criteria? What were the success criteria that they followed to make them have a better path?
So we, kind of dug into a little more detail, and we asked about what were the specific attacks, and we found out it's a combination of web application attacks, actual, things like malicious external hardware, removable media, DDoS attacks. And then we've asked them about what type of technology they've implemented. And so those that were successful implemented a balanced approach where they had kind of a layered security approach to this, and they had protection against most of these attack vectors. So you can't just protect against one thing, it turns out, because of the attackers will look for any kind of open door or window. You do have to have a comprehensive project that you implement to be successful.
Yeah, there's some interesting data in here, Jason, where it looks at things that have already been implemented and work pretty well, right? And so you have things like antivirus and intrusion protection, but web application firewall, segmentation, anomaly detection, advanced threat protection, network traffic encryption are some of the buckets that it looks like show up in this report, Michael, of these are things that when they're implemented, they seem to be working to help protect the environment. So, there is some guidance and kind of roadmap in here for listeners that, are trying to get their arms around some of this.
Yeah. And I would say some of that is going to be influence as well. I mean, on BSW, we talk about, having that strategy and that seat at the table. And unfortunately, in this segment of the industry, sometimes it's the way it's always been is kind of the go-to. And unfortunately, we're in a time where that doesn't work anymore, right? And we need to mature and we need to progress. So, I would think having those strategic conversations all the way at the top and really educating leaders of those organizations to make the necessary changes is super important as well. Support from the top.
Right. But again, we have some specific recommendations, right? And where to start from, things like fix your remote access, right? Make sure you have multi-factor, some other protection on remote access. Automate your security patches and automate that process. Put in at least some rudimentary segmentation. Separate your IT from your OT network. Maybe look into microsegmentation. So there are things that people can do to start their journey and realize benefits more quickly.
But so to your point earlier, the data would indicate that if you actually do these things and you start to take control of the security issues that you have, that it works. Right? It's not as if the investment spend gets input and there's no positive outcome, which you could understand why people wouldn't create that activity then. But my question really, I don't know if this is rhetorical or I'm really looking for an answer, but if the data indicates that, why still the hesitancy, why the lack of effort to actually implement these controls when they are actually effective? That's where I find it very confusing that we're not tracking to the data more. We're tracking to too hard. I don't want to do it. I've got legacy reasons. Yeah.
Well, we asked these questions again. What we found out was the biggest reason was that the project, why did they fail? The project took too long, right? So what that's an indication is that maybe the organization wasn't committed enough to actually see it to completion. The second thing was the cost overruns, right? So it started to cost too much, and people again put it on hold or whatever else happened, right? So we know why these things happen, and people just have to stick it out and see it to completion.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge probably for some of these executives, a little bit to Jason's point earlier, is getting the seat at the table, making the justifications, and then getting through these with executive commitment to get through these projects, right? Because it's really easy to get distracted right now. Interest rates are up, inflation's up, I got to cut spending. Well, I'm going to cut that security budget over there. I'm going to put this project on hold. But if the data says, no, if we stay the course and we get through this, we'll be in a better position. It's really an executive communication and leadership discussion, I think, at this point, for these organizations to be able to push through and finish some of these projects. Because if they do, they'll be in better shape.
Right. Absolutely. I think you're right on there.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thanks very much for having me on the show. Appreciate it. It
was great. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week. Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the criminals are hiding in the conversation. Cyber criminals use social engineering, loaded with urgency and fear, to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified these 13 types and shows you how to protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. How have business drivers impacted your organizational risk? Simulate Extended Security Posture Management enables CISOs to know what parts of your cybersecurity portfolio to keep, what to get rid of, and what to buy. Know that your cybersecurity investments are optimized and can reduce cybersecurity risk. With Simulate, you don't assume you are secure, you know. Visit securityweekly.com/simulate to learn more. Cloud security compliance doesn't have to be complicated. Whether your business is migrating to the cloud or a seasoned cloud service provider, Bar Advisory can help you simplify security and compliance frameworks, including SOC, ISO, and HITRUST. As an extension of your team, Bar specialists will put your people first and empower them with the knowledge and tools needed to stay secure and compliant at every stage of your business growth. Learn how Bar can help your company build trust with consumers and become cyber resilient at securityweekly.com/Bar Advisory. That's BARR Advisory. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, articles for the week. I missed both of you last week. So evolution means connecting business value to security. Oh, sorry. I guess I had a network blip at headquarters. I said I missed Jason and Ben last week. I put articles in here for both of you this week.
I love it. Thank you so much. We miss being here.
Glad to be
back. So this first, yes, it's good to have you back. So a CISO evolution. Now we've talked about the CISO evolution for a while now, and I was interested in, are we making progress? Because we see a lot of these articles, Jason and Ben, right? We see the CISO role's evolving. We're trying to be a seat at the table. We need to talk business value to security. And, we talk about it, but is it actually happening? I guess that's the big question for me. Are you guys seeing it?
Yeah, I mean, well, number one, if the listeners get a chance to read the article, I love the backstory behind this. I mean, the people who wrote the book, one of them was presenting at RSA and nobody showed up to his talk except for one person. And what came out of it is they decided to write a book together about cybersecurity leadership because they started talking to each other. And I think that's just an outstanding story. As far as are we making progress, I think we are, but I think, we're still realizing some of those struggles that we've continuously seen. Getting the seat at the table, influencing the C-level executives, really getting meaningful conversations with the board of directors or the CEO, and really breaking down that barrier. And one of the things that was in this article that I loved was a focus on the art of negotiation, because I think sometimes we fall into the trap of sometimes saying no or being perceived as that department of no, when really it's about getting to the outcome that we can all agree upon, right? So, I think trying to make this a little short is I think there's work to do on both sides. I think we as leaders need to do better at giving folks outcomes that align with our security program. And I think, C-level executives, board of directors need to start seeing us as value add to the business.
Yeah, we talked.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit about. I was to say it's a little bit about push-pull, right? I think that sometimes it's about facilitating in ourselves, like the right relationship, the right language, like, trying to figure out how to get involved in the business. And as you so correctly said, not being the department of no, trying to figure out how to get to yes, trying out how to win. You called out the call out here to Chris Voss in here. I think, he was a head negotiator for the FBI, right? Everybody should read his book or, listen to it on a download. I think it's a great insight into what really negotiation should be. But at the same time, I think, Jason, I'm going to guess that you're going to be behind this 100%. Like, it's rough to get beat down all the time. I mean, once you feel like you're hitting your head against the wall every day and you're not getting anywhere to get that seat at the table or to, get involved in the rest of the business level discussion, it kind of takes a little bit of the wind out of, I think, a lot of our colleagues' sails sometimes, and makes it harder to want to try to keep reaching for that perfect state of, where CISO should evolve to. And so I think we need to meet the business at the business, but the business needs to invite us in. And I just go back to hoping that some of this, the legislation and the requirements around board participation from a security side, I really hope that starts moving the bubble on this, because if it doesn't, it's just a long road.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Ben. And that's, that's probably the main reason why we see CISOs jumping ship so fast, right? I mean, are we still looking at the average tenure of a CISO being right around that 18-month mark? I mean, I see a lot of my colleagues, jumping ship within a year. A year passes, and all of a sudden I'm seeing a new LinkedIn update, and they're at a new spot. So, I'm assuming it's not the right fit, and they're not gaining the traction that maybe they were promised during their interview, or getting the support that they were promised during the interview. So yeah, I mean, the business needs to support us as well. And at the end of the day, like I said, we have a responsibility as well. We have to build trust. Building trust within the organization, that creates influence. So it has to be both of those things working together.
Yeah, last week we were talking about building a culture of yes, because again, it goes back to this perception is security is the department of no. How do you create a culture of yes, and how do you make progress, right? And it leads into these first couple articles, because it is about negotiation. It is about talking to the business about, okay, we can do it this way, or we can do it this way, or here's the risk. Like it's an active discussion, and it's not just no, and it's not necessarily just yes, but it's having the conversations to move things forward. And that's why I pulled in the second article, because it talks a little bit about the resilience of your program and the flexibility of your program, because maybe it's not this particular piece, but it's a variation of that capability that allows you, because it works better for the business, right? And so having flexibility and resilience in your program may put you in a better position to have those negotiation discussions with the business.
Yeah. And this next article is perfect, because they quote something, right? And it says here, CISOs often ask, but I've heard CEOs, CFOs, leaders within organizations ask the same type of question all the time. How do I avoid being hit by the next major attack? Well, guess what? It's not predictable, right? And I think that's a good moral of the story, is that we need to be able to start speaking toward business risk management, business resilience, because at the end of the day, if I go to the mall, I can't predict that someone's going to break into my car, but I can have all of the, the compensating controls in place. I can park in a good spot. I can make sure my alarm is set, all of those type of things. But we can't predict that. We have to have, the strategies to make it so the risk goes down. That's what we need to be communicating to leaders, is that we can't predict the next cyber attack. But what we can do is we can make our organization much more resilient and mitigate the risk.
Right.
And I think too many people still, like you said it's both sides of the coin again, right? It's CISOs trying to articulate a position of we're going to protect the org and we're not going to get compromised. And it's the rest of the C staff like coming in and saying, what are we doing? How do we get it? How do we spend enough money to make sure we don't get compromised?
Right.
It's just not it. It's just not the question. It's not the level of conversation that you should be having. The conversation should be, given the threat landscape and our, risk tolerance, we're essentially buying down the risk to a point where we think it's worth it if we get compromised, right? But it's really about what's the resiliency, what's the potential to get back on our feet quickly, how do we minimize the exposure and the impact to the company after this happens. That's really the worth of the CISO is how calm are they, how do they respond under pressure, and how do they manage the crisis moving forward, right? And how do you get to recovery quickly?
Yeah, what's interesting, somebody's going to ask me eventually, like, okay, why'd you pick living security? But this is one of the reasons I did, right? We know where some of the risk elements are. We know that our users are risky in certain activities. We know that is the opening to the potential breach or ransomware attack, right? We don't spend enough time on aspects of this. It's the risk management disciplines that are going to be important moving forward, Jason. Where are my risky users? Because if I have more risk in that group of users, then what can I do from a compensating or mitigating control perspective to protect those users if they do something risky that doesn't put the business in place? And even if they do, what are all my reactive controls to be able to be resilient and get back online quickly if it does happen, right? You have to play on both sides. You got to be on the proactive side and the reactive side. But without risk in the equation, how do you make the right decisions? Because you can't protect 100% of your employees all the time.
That's right.
You can't. It's impossible.
And this is exactly the conversation and why I love being on the consultative side, right? I mean, this is the conversation I literally had with a, $300+ million construction organization sitting across from a CFO asking about cybersecurity. And one of the first things we needed to talk to him about was, this is not a technology problem. This is risk mitigation. We're managing business risk. Let's have the strategic conversation. And, lucky for us that CFO had the insight to say, you want to know what? You're absolutely right. I want to do business with your organization. I want to hire Envision to come in here and help us with that level of strategy, right? It's, I'm so glad we're starting to see executives like CFOs want to have these conversations, realizing It's not just a technology issue.
Right. It's a people issue. It's more people than it is technology these days, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. Is if people are the biggest risk factor, then why aren't we spending more time helping the people?
Yeah, it's people, it's process, and then the technology, right? I mean, it sounds like we really wear those terms thin, but that's really what it is, right? We need to make sure we're educating people, we're giving them the right processes and standards and procedures. And then adoption of the technology. I've said this my entire career. You can bring in a shiny new tool, but if you don't adopt it and you don't have processes and you're not using it, it's just an expensive shelfware. That's all it is.
Yeah. We're going to get to that in a couple articles. I wanted to go to the 8 leadership and management principles from Jocko, right? I mean, you love this book. You've read this book. You followed Jocko extremely well. Every time this article pops up about once every year or so, and I pull it in because I know you love to talk about this one.
I do. Absolutely. No, this is, I love it when we can bring in military style leadership because honestly, it breeds true leadership skills and strategies that we can really bring over to the corporate world, right? Number one, it's accountability and responsibility. That's such a huge piece in today's workforce. We need to be taking responsibility for what falls into our teams, whether it's, they go on and say manage upstream and manage downstream, up the chain of command, down the chain of command. We need to feel responsibility in our organization to take the bull by the horns and start making progress. Leadership isn't a title, right? It's action. Being a leader is, you hold a level of accountability and responsibility within your organization. You want to go in and get things done. So, I love these articles. It's belief in your team. As a leader, you need to be able to articulate what the vision is, why is such a huge piece. Employees want to know why they're doing things, right? It's not just the what. Why are we here? Why are we doing what we do? Why is our business, here? And why do we exist? Why am I working so hard every day, sometimes 15, 16 hours? What's that outcome that we're trying to achieve as a business?
Yeah. The big one for me is being decisive with uncertainty and executing, right? Because
Yes.
remember, in the military, there are times you're disconnected from command. You're going to have to make decisions and execute against those decisions. Make those decisive decisions. The one thing that, in our industry right now, you see lots of startups, indecisiveness is like the killer of innovation in startups. It is the absolute killer, because as soon as you wait to make that decision to execute against it, one of your competitors are going to go right by you.
100%.
And as leaders, you have to be able to make a decision, execute. If it's the wrong decision, fail fast and move on. But sitting there for 6 months to make a decision about, should I do this? Should I do that? You're just killing yourself from an innovation standpoint. And your competitors are going to catch you or pass you.
And you want to know what, Matt? The foundation of that and decentralized command and being able to make decisions on the fly all lends to number 8. Discipline equals freedom. That means you have the standards, processes, procedure, the discipline to get things done. When you can empower your staff to make those decisions on the fly because they know standard operating procedures, they know the processes and the appetite of the organization, they know what processes they should be following when, and it's like the back of their hand, they're empowered to make decisions on the fly.
Right. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Next article, practice transparent leadership. I'm a huge proponent of this for anybody who doesn't know me. Like, transparency is what I'm all about, to the point where some days it might actually burn you, but I'm always going to be transparent, only because I think it's, to me as a leader, being open and honest and having transparent conversations builds the trust you need to build your team and get them to the point where the previous article kicks in, right? Where they can make decisions. They can create that freedom because they're confident in the decisions they're making, and then the organization can move faster. It starts with being transparent, being open and honest, and having these conversations. It's so foundational to the cultures that I look for when I go into organizations or when I'm looking for a new job. These are key elements for me because that's how you build that initial trust.
Yeah, I mean, it's having the healthy relationships with your team, right? And in order to have the healthy relationships with your team, they need to trust you. And, trust is, like I said, trust is that foundation of a relationship and influence and the ability to influence. And if you're not being honest and you're not being open, you don't allow for people to ask questions and you're commanding from upon high. You don't provide people with access to the right information at the right time. You're not involving your team in the decision-making. You're not going to gain that trust. Therefore, you're not going to have that influence. You're not going to have those relationships, and then it's going to create a toxic environment.
Yep. Which impacts number 5, how to move from strategy to execution. 3 out of 5 organizations fail on the execution side. And part of it is because of poor leadership, which is why these articles are kind of stacked in the order that they're stacked this week. It's that leadership and the ability to have the right resources and the right processes to actually move from strategy to execution and deliver on those goals. And that's why these leadership discussions are so important when you think about how do you move an organization from one stage to the next? Because at the end of the day, it's about executing against your plans.
100%. And honestly, it's hiring the right mix of folks as well. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book. It's called Jet Fuel. But it's about the CEO and the chief operation officer, yin and yang, right? And you have the visionary, and then you have they call it the integrator. And they thrive together when that relationship is strong. The visionary has their strengths, but they also have their weakness. And weakness is execution, right? Where on the other side, an operational person, their strength is execution. And they empower the visionary to be a visionary. So I think having the right people in the right seats in order to make sure you have a good strategy, because that's in this article, have a good strategy. Part of that strategy is the people that you have to build the plan and execute against the plan.
And you got to have to believe in the people and empower them, right? You have to empower the team to actually execute. I mean, I've seen that a lot where, people either, one, they don't set out the vision that everybody's aligned to and they know where they're marching. So you got people headed in different directions. Or 2, they're not actually empowering the people to make the decisions to to get the actual work done, and that'll just break a team.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. That's some of the roadblocks that in that book you read about. It's about the visionary still wanting to hold on to the execution, but not being able to do it well, because you can't be the visionary and execute at the same time and do it effectively, right? It's like you're juggling too many balls and you can't do them all well. So that's some of the roadblocks and some of the failures that you see is making sure you're focused on the right areas and you have the right people focusing and trusting them to execute.
This is why your leadership team is very important. You brought up a very good point, Jason, right? Is I need somebody that's a visionary and then somebody that can execute. When you have two visionaries or two executors, you're missing a piece. You need the yin and the yang, right? Because I've seen organizations struggle where you have the top two leaders, both as visionaries, and nobody's executing under the covers, right? Like that is a huge concern, right? Or you can have people that are just executors and nobody's thinking about, okay, who's going to take us out? Where's our adjacency market? What's our next move? And then your competitor just blows right by you, right? You need both the visionary and the execution side.
You have to, and you have to allow for that freedom of opinion, let's say, because there are so many instances where you have a visionary who sweep in and say, I have these 5 great ideas and we need to institute them. And we need to build these offers around these ideas. And if you don't have that balance to say, hey, number one, is there market demand for this right now? Can we make money off of this right now? Right. I mean, because visionaries think big, they think long, they think far out. And sometimes it's not the right moment for some of those visions. And you have to be comfortable to say, let's table that till next year and take a look to see if there's even a market for this right now.
Yep. Conversations I'll be having this week. I love this next article from Gartner. Now, normally, I don't pull in these trends very often because I don't like these like, hey, here's what's going to happen in 22. And, this is a little longer range, and there's some interesting data in here. And when I started reading through these, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So take like number 3, 60% of organizations will embrace zero trust as a starting point for security by 2025. More than half will fail to realize the benefits. Now, think about that for a second. Yeah, that's scary as hell, right? 60% of organizations will buy into the concept of zero trust, and half of them will fail to realize the benefit.
Right. So you have the 40% who didn't buy in, and half of the 60 are failing.
Right.
Scary.
Exactly right. So, holy cow. I thought the privacy rights will cover 5 billion citizens by 2023. Now think about that again. Conversations I've already started having here around PII and privacy data and what do you share and what don't you share. These are things, CISOs and risk officers have to think about. The privacy side of this is going to be more and more intense. When 5 billion citizens are covered by something like a GDP or GDPR, like that's a big number. That changes the way you think about data and what you're collecting and what you're using. Those have impacts to businesses.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not big on overregulation, but to Ben's point earlier, we definitely need the catalyst to get our C-level executives and board of directors thinking about this because it's not happening organically. So my hope is that it's not overbearing, but it's enough to make, because I don't want it to become a check in the box world, right? We know that fails. We know that for a fact. Check in the box fails. But we need to have balance there where it's going to be motivating enough to make board of directors implement plans and invest.
Yeah. There's just I can go on. By 2025, 60% of organizations will use cybersecurity risk as a primary determinant in conducting third-party transactions and business engagements. If you're in the financial and healthcare space, you should already be at that number because they're regulated. But it's going to take us that long to get everybody else to 60%.
Yeah, I know. Like again, you're absolutely correct. This should be some of these things should be table stakes already.
Yeah. I do like the last one. By 2026, 50% of C-level executives will have performance requirements related to risk built into their employment contracts. Now, we've been talking about the board, been talking about having cybersecurity expertise on the board. But when you make part of their compensation and their employee contracts tied to risk, that'll also change how people perceive cybersecurity going forward. It's a really interesting stat that if you can get this embedded into the C-level contracts, employee contracts, that also has a big influence on how cybersecurity gets funded and deployed moving forward. But we got to wait until 2026 to even get half of them there.
Well, my hope, I was going to say, Matt,
I've been saying this for a long time, incentivize the behavior that you actually want. When you think about security and you go out and you talk operations teams, most operations teams, like in an IT environment, have traditionally been incentivized upon uptime and reliability, right? And so if you look at, a security initiative coming in and impacting that reliability or that uptime, it's seen as a detractor to their performance incentive. When you start changing the way the performance incentives are aligned, all of a sudden you see the behavior you actually want to actually have happen suddenly starts to manifest itself. So I think this one's great. I would love to see people align more towards the output that we're looking for.
Yeah. I think the only thing that would make this stat a little bit better if it was 80% and then focused on the CEO, right? Because I think this is generic to C-level executives. I'd love to see a statistic that said 80% of CEOs' compensation plan are going to be around, cybersecurity focused performance. That'd be good for me.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. Yeah,
I want
sure.
I want the top leader to be accountable.
Yeah, because at the C level, you could say, well, it's written into the CISO contract.
Yeah, hopefully it's not the CISO, because then that's just a miss. Like, good luck.
I don't like the scarecrow from the Wizard of Oz. And when it comes down to brass tacks, executives have the ability to say, well, you want to know what? The CISO said no, or the CFO said no, or you know what I mean? Like, I just don't want the scarecrow from the Wizard of Oz to happen. I want central accountability. That's nirvana.
Ultimately, the alignment should be if it's your top level risk as an enterprise, then the CEO really needs accountability.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think to your point, Jason, it'd be nice if we could get 50% of CEOs to have it in their employee contract by 2026 and not all C levels, because we'd probably be in better shape than just the C levels if the CEO had it in their employee contract.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. Last article, we're still going through some interesting hiring. This is a list of do's and don'ts from a hiring perspective, right? And we've talked about this before, but I think it's interesting. Now that I've changed jobs, I'm going through this list going, yep. Like, these are the things I did. Like, these are the things I'm evaluating as I was looking at opportunities. Right? What's the scope of the role? What's the culture and mission like? Like, these are important things that I, as someone who was looking for a job, am looking for. And these are tips and guides for employers to say, these are the things you need to make sure are clear as part of the posting, because you want alignment here, right? Yep. You don't want somebody to come in, you've got a culture that's this and they're over here. Like, you want alignment when you're out searching for these people. And it was funny because I was going through this and I'm going, these are all the questions I'm asking when I'm out looking. Like, I want to make sure I have 100% alignment with these.
I love that you brought this article in, because when I read it, we have a sister company called KLR. They have executive search as part of one of their offers, and we were helping a mutual customer, a large bank in Connecticut, and they're looking for a CISO. So they brought me in to help augment their executive search team to really build out that job description while they're looking for their executive search, while they're going through the executive search process and looking for the CISO. So many of these items we talked about, right? And working with the chief risk officer. Listen, this isn't your Nirvana wish list. Seriously was a conversation that we had. Let's make it so you're getting good applicants. Let's make sure we're getting good people at the table, right? Don't list every certification in the book as a requirement. I mean, that was another one. Nice to have, sure. Shouldn't be a requirement. These lists and lists and lists of certifications. Right. So this totally aligns with the conversations that we're having today about hiring at the executive level.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, any final closing thoughts? Is your audio up? He's been having some issues.
No, I was, I was thinking, look, you hit it. I think you've really got to be tailored to what you're actually looking for a role. And Jason, you mentioned it. Like it can't be everything, right? It's got to be the things that are really important to you. You have to target it. So, and don't be afraid to bring somebody in who has the potential for the talent, but not necessarily the opportunity.
Dead on, Ben.
To show
dead on.
Past.
I love that you just said that, Ben, because one of the things I said to the chief risk officer was, do you have the appetite for this person to grow into this position? Right? And that was a main focus right there, because they had nirvana in this job description before it was released. And one of the main things was, do you have the appetite to let this person grow into that?
And I would also say, like, if you have nirvana in your job title, you better have nirvana in the pay scale.
Compensation,
right? Like, how often do you see that? It's not aligned, right? Like what you're asking for is not what you're paying.
You know it.
Yes, interesting times on the compensation discussion, but for another time. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week. I'll be home on Business Security Week.